What if I told you that the infamous Targaryen madness we've heard so much about in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon looked completely different just a few generations earlier? When we think of mad Targaryens, our minds immediately jump to Aerys II burning people alive in his throne room, or Daenerys reducing King's Landing to ash. But travel back about 70 years before Robert's Rebellion to the era of Dunk and Egg, and the manifestation of this so-called curse takes on an entirely different character. Today, we're diving deep into how Targaryen madness evolved, or perhaps more accurately, how it devolved from the relatively contained cases we see during Aegon V's time to the civilization-ending catastrophes of the Dance of the Dragons and the Mad King's reign. Before we compare these eras, we need to understand what Targaryen madness actually is. It's not a single condition, but rather a constellation of mental instabilities that plagued House Targaryen throughout their nearly 300-year dynasty. The famous saying goes that when a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin and the world holds its breath to see which side it lands on, greatness or madness. This wasn't just poetic language. It was a brutal, statistical reality born from centuries of incestuous marriages designed to keep the blood of old Valyria pure. The Targaryens practiced sibling marriage with the same dedication their ancestors in Valyria had shown. And just like the inbreeding of dragons led to smaller, weaker creatures when they were confined to the dragon pit, inbreeding among the Targaryens amplified both their greatest virtues and their most devastating flaws. From a medical perspective, what we're looking at resembles conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and various personality disorders, all of which have genetic components that become more pronounced through inbreeding. But this wasn't just genetics. There was something else at play, something connected to their bond with dragons, their prophetic dreams, and the magical blood of Valyria flowing through their veins. What's fascinating is that Targaryen madness wasn't consistent. Some kings ruled for decades, showing no signs of instability. Jaehaerys, known as the Old King, reigned peacefully for 55 years and was considered one of the greatest rulers Westeros ever saw. His brother Balon was similarly stable, yet their father Aegon had siblings and descendants who exhibited everything from religious zealotry to violent paranoia. The madness seemed to skip generations, lying dormant before exploding with devastating force in individuals like Aerion, Brightflame, or Aerys II. Now let's examine how madness manifests during the Dance of the Dragons, the period House of the Dragon covers. This is roughly 130 years before Robert's Rebellion, and what we see is madness on a civilizational scale. The conflict between Rhaenyra and Aegon II isn't just about two individuals losing their minds. It's about how Targaryen exceptionalism, their belief in their own supremacy backed by dragons, creates a systemic madness that tears the realm apart. Rhaenyra Targaryen starts as the beloved daughter of King Viserys I, a young woman full of promise and idealism. But the transformation she undergoes during the dance reveals something crucial about Targaryen madness. It's not always present from birth. Sometimes it's awakened by trauma, by loss, by the corrupting influence of absolute power combined with the grief that comes from losing those you love. By the time Rhaenyra takes King's Landing, she's become unrecognizable, earning the epithet Maegor with teats for her cruelty. She orders the torture of Tyland Lannister, presides over a reign of terror in the capital, and watches as the realm burns. But here's what makes the House of the Dragon era distinct. The madness isn't confined to one or two individuals. It spreads like a contagion through the entire family. Aegon II becomes increasingly unstable as the war progresses, his physical wounds mirroring his psychological deterioration. Aemon Targaryen demonstrates a terrifying competence that can accompany Targaryen ruthlessness, burning the Riverlands and showing no mercy to anyone who opposes him. Even Daemon, perhaps the most clear-eyed of them all, makes decisions driven by something darker than rational calculation. What's crucial to understand about this era is that dragons amplify everything. The Targaryens have 20 dragons at the start of the dance, and each one is a nuclear weapon bonded to a human with unstable genetics and unlimited ambition. When these people break bad, they don't just hurt their immediate families, they burn entire regions, kill thousands, and bring civilization itself to the brink. The madness of the Dance era is madness with teeth, fire-breathing teeth that can reduce stone castles to molten slag. Now travel forward about 100 years to the Dunk and Egg era, and something has fundamentally changed. The dragons are gone, dead for nearly 40 years by the time Dunk meets Egg at Ashford Meadow. And without dragons, Targaryen madness takes on a different, almost tragically human quality. It's still dangerous, still destructive, but it's contained by the simple fact that mad Targaryens can no longer summon dragonfire at will. The poster child for madness in this era is Prince Aerion Targaryen, known as Aerion Brightflame. Aerion is Egg's older brother, and from childhood, he embodies everything terrifying about Targaryen madness without the scale of destruction we see in later eras. Aerion genuinely believes he's a dragon in human form. Not metaphorically, not poetically, he literally thinks he is a dragon wearing human skin as a disguise. This delusion drives every aspect of his personality. He dresses in reds and golds and oranges to mimic fire. His tournament armor features flames. Even his personal sigil shows a three-headed dragon with heads colored red, orange, and gold. But Aerion's madness manifests primarily through cruelty to those weaker than him. He once threatened to castrate his younger brother Aegon, putting a knife to the boy's genitals in the middle of the night and joking about turning him into a sister he could marry. He threw Aegon's pet cat down a well. At the tourney at Ashford Meadow, when he felt insulted by a puppet show depicting a knight slaying a dragon, he didn't just complain to the authorities, he and his men destroyed the puppeteer's stall, and he personally, deliberately broke a young woman's fingers, causing her to scream in agony. During the actual joust, Aerion intentionally lowered his lance to impale his opponent's horse rather than strike the knight's shield, an act of such shocking, dishonorable conduct that even his own brother Egg shouted for Aerion's opponent to kill him. When Sir Duncan the Tall, a hedge knight, intervened to stop Aerion from torturing the puppeteer, Aerion's response was to demand that Duncan have his teeth broken with a hammer and his belly cut open. This level of sadistic creativity in punishment speaks to something deeply wrong in Aerion's mind. What's interesting is how Aerion's own family responds to him. His brother Daeron drinks himself into stupors to avoid dealing with family obligations. Prince Baelor, the heir to the throne and Aerion's cousin, not only sides with Duncan in the trial, but tells Duncan he would have attacked Aerion himself if Duncan hadn't gotten there first. Even Aerion's father, Prince Maekar, seems to recognize his son is a monster, and after the trial at Ashford, exiles Aerion to Lys in the hope that a few years in the Free Cities might somehow fix him. They don't. But the most important example of madness in the Dunk and Egg era isn't Aerion at all. It's his younger brother, the protagonist of the tales, Aegon V himself, Egg. And this is where things get genuinely tragic, because Egg is not mad in any conventional sense. He's intelligent, compassionate, deeply concerned with the welfare of the small folk, and by all accounts, a good man who becomes a good king. But obsession can be its own form of madness, and Egg becomes obsessed with one thing: bringing dragons back to Westeros. This obsession doesn't stem from megalomania or delusion. It comes from a rational, if ultimately flawed, calculation. As king, Aegon V tries to implement reforms that would improve the lives of common people, grant them rights and protections, limit the power of the great lords. Noble goals. But he encounters resistance at every turn. The lords who supported his unlikely path to the throne feel betrayed. They expected a grateful king who would reward them, not one who would curtail their ancient privileges. Egg concludes that only with dragons could he force the proud lords to accept his vision for a more just realm. So he spends the last years of his reign consumed by research into dragon breeding. He commissions expeditions to places as far away as Ashai by the Shadow, searching for texts and knowledge about Valyrian dragon lore that might have been lost in Westeros. He gathers 7 dragon eggs, planning to honor the 7 gods with their hatching. And in 259 AC, he summons his family and closest friends to his favorite castle, Summerhall, to celebrate the birth of his great-grandson Rhaegar and, secretly, to attempt the ritual that will return dragons to the world. We don't know exactly what happened at Summerhall. The historical records are deliberately obscured, a Meister's account blotted by spilled ink at the crucial moment. We know there were pyromancers involved, we know wildfire was used, we know the flames grew out of control, burning so hot that the entire castle was consumed, and we know that Aegon V died in that fire, along with his eldest son Duncan the Small and his lifelong friend Sir Duncan the Tall, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. So what's the fundamental difference between Targaryen madness in these two eras? In the House of the Dragon era, madness is weaponized through dragons. When Aemon loses control, entire noble houses burn. When Rhaenyra's sanity frays, a city starves and rebels. The madness of this era is immediate, spectacular, and devastating on a massive scale. It's madness that writes itself into history books through the sheer magnitude of its destruction. In the Dunk and Egg era, madness is more intimate and, in some ways, more human. Aerion's cruelty is horrifying but limited in scope. He can break a woman's fingers, demand brutal punishments, even kill his opponent's horse in a joust, but he can't burn a city. He can't reduce a castle to ash. His madness makes him a monster in personal interactions, but it doesn't threaten the stability of the entire realm. When he finally drinks wildfire believing it will transform him into a dragon, it's a lonely, agonizing death that harms only himself. Even Aegon V's fatal obsession, while it kills several important people, doesn't plunge Westeros into civil war. The crown passes smoothly to his son Jaehaerys II. The realm mourns but continues. The tragedy at Summerhall becomes a cautionary tale, a song about grief and hubris, but it doesn't fundamentally destabilize the Seven Kingdoms the way the Dance of the Dragons does, or the way Aerys' madness eventually will. This brings us to perhaps the most important factor in understanding the evolution of Targaryen madness: the presence or absence of dragons. Dragons aren't just weapons, they're psychologically linked to their riders through bonds we don't fully understand. Some masters and scholars believe this bond actually stabilizes Targaryens mentally and physically, that being a dragon rider provides a kind of psychic ballast that keeps the madness at bay. There's evidence for this theory. Many of the most stable Targaryens were dragon riders. Jaehaerys I had Vermithor. Good Queen Alysanne had Silverwing. These dragons lived long lives with their riders, and both Jaehaerys and Alysanne were notable for their sanity and wisdom. Conversely, Targaryens without dragons seem more prone to certain manifestations of madness. Aerion never bonded with a dragon, and his delusion of being a dragon in human form might have been his psyche's twisted attempt to compensate for that lack. But here's the paradox. Dragons also enable the worst expressions of Targaryen madness. Give a mentally unstable person the power to burn cities, and they will eventually burn cities. The Dance of the Dragons proves this. Nearly every dragon dies in that conflict, killed either in battle or by angry mobs, because once the small folk realize that dragons can die, once they understand these godlike creatures can be brought down by simple spears and arrows, if you're willing to pay the price in blood, the mystique shatters. By the Dunk and Egg era, this mystique is long gone. Dragons have been dead for decades, the Targaryens are still the royal family, still commanding tremendous respect and wielding real power, but they're also just people. Dangerous people when they're mad, certainly, but mortal people without the nuclear option. This forces mad Targaryens to work within human limitations, and while this doesn't make them less cruel, it does make them less catastrophically destructive. There's another dimension to this that House of the Dragon introduced, which recontextualizes everything. Aegon, the Conqueror's dream of the Song of Ice and Fire. We learned that this prophecy has been passed down from ruler to ruler in House Targaryen. A secret burden carried by each successive monarch. They know that a great darkness is coming from the north, and they believe a Targaryen must sit the Iron Throne to unite the realm against it. This prophecy might explain some of the desperation we see in Targaryen behavior. It's not just personal ambition or family pride driving them. It's the terrible weight of knowing that if they fail, if they lose power, if they can't maintain their dynasty, then all of humanity might fall to the long night. This transforms their actions from mere madness into something more complex, a kind of tragic heroism twisted by fear and obsession. Think about how this prophecy might have affected Aegon V. He knows, or suspects, that dragons are essential to fighting the coming darkness. The original Aegon conquered Westeros specifically to unite it against this threat. But without dragons, how can the Targaryens fulfill their prophesied role? How can they be the shield against the dark when they've lost their greatest weapon? This knowledge might have driven Egg's obsession with hatching dragon eggs to a fever pitch. He wasn't just trying to enforce his reforms, he was trying to save the world. Similarly, this prophecy helps explain why the Targaryens in House of the Dragon fight so savagely for the throne. It's not just about who gets to wear a crown. It's about who will be in position to lead humanity when the ultimate test comes. From this perspective, Rhaenyra's refusal to yield isn't just stubbornness. She believes, whether consciously or not, that the prophecy requires her bloodline to continue, that giving up means dooming humanity. This doesn't excuse the atrocities committed during the dance, but it adds a layer of desperate purpose beneath the surface. Let's talk about the genetics and the timeline, because this is crucial to understanding the evolution of Targaryen madness. Aerys II, Targaryen, the Mad King, was born from the marriage of Jaehaerys II and his sister Shera. This returned to the old practice of sibling marriage after several generations of Targaryens who had married outside the family into houses Rogare, Martell, Penrose, Dane, and Blackwood. These outside marriages had actually diluted the effects of inbreeding, producing more stable rulers. But Jaehaerys II and Shera believed the prophecy required them to marry each other to produce the prince that was promised. So they defied Jaehaerys II's father, Aegon V, and married in secret. This decision to return to incestuous marriage after generations of relative genetic health is what directly produces Aerys II. And Aerys, following his parents' example, marries his sister Rhaella, further concentrating the genetic damage. By the time we get to their children, Rhaegar, Viserys, and Daenerys, we're looking at generations of renewed inbreeding stacked on top of the original Targaryen genetic problems. In contrast, during the Dunk and Egg era, we're in that period where several kings had married outside the family. Aegon V himself, despite being from a direct Targaryen line, eventually marries Betha Blackwood, not a close blood relative. His children are therefore less inbred than many Targaryen generations. This genetic diversity might explain why, despite having a clearly mad brother in Aerion, most of Aegon's children and grandchildren show no signs of the madness until we get to the inbreeding of Jaehaerys II and Shira. This creates a fascinating pattern. The Targaryens in House of the Dragon era are highly inbred, and their madness manifests in spectacular, dynasty-threatening ways. Then there's a period of genetic dilution through outside marriages, leading to the relatively stable period of the Dunk and Egg era, where madness, while still present in individuals like Aerion, doesn't threaten the entire realm. Then the return to incestuous marriage produces Aerys II, whose madness directly leads to the fall of House Targaryen from power. What really distinguishes these eras isn't just the presence or absence of dragons or the genetic factors, but the scale of consequences. During the Dance of the Dragons, Targaryen madness, ambition, and pride result in the deaths of tens of thousands of people. Entire regions are devastated, noble houses are extinguished. The dragon population, which had been the foundation of Targaryen power, is reduced from around 20 dragons to just 3 traumatized creatures that will never breed successfully. The dance nearly ends House Targaryen right there, and it absolutely ends the Age of Dragons. In the Dunk and Egg era, the consequences are more contained. Yes, Prince Baelor Breakspear dies at the trial at Ashford, a tremendous loss that changes the succession. Yes, the Summerhall tragedy kills a beloved king and several important figures, but these are discrete events, not civilization-threatening catastrophes. The realm recovers. The dynasty continues. Life goes on. This difference in scale is partly about dragons, but it's also about timing and context. During the dance, the Targaryens are at the height of their power, and their fall is proportionally catastrophic. During the Dunk and Egg era, dragons are gone, but the dynasty is still strong enough to weather individual tragedies. It's a sweet spot of sorts, where the Targaryens are powerful enough to maintain order, but limited enough that their mad members can't destroy everything. But this sweet spot doesn't last. By the time Aerys II comes to power, the Targaryens have been without dragons for over a century. They rule through historical prestige and political alliances, both of which can be destroyed by a sufficiently mad king. And Aerys destroys both. His paranoia alienates his allies, his cruelty makes enemies of his friends. His famous plan to burn King's Landing and rise from the ashes as a dragon shows how the old delusions persist even without dragons to validate them. Perhaps the saddest aspect of comparing these eras is seeing how noble intentions curdle into catastrophe. Rhaenyra doesn't start the dance wanting to burn the realm. She starts trying to claim what she sees as her rightful inheritance, what her father explicitly promised her. Aegon II doesn't necessarily want civil war. He's persuaded by advisors that his claim is valid and that accepting Rhaenyra's rule would be dangerous. Both of them have reasonable arguments, and if they were different people, maybe they could have found a compromise. But they're Targaryens, with all the pride and fire that implies, and compromise isn't in their nature. Similarly, Aegon V doesn't want to die in flames at Summerhall. He wants to be remembered as the king who brought justice to the small folk and returned dragons to the world. He's arguably the most morally upright Targaryen to ever sit the Iron Throne, a man who genuinely cares about the welfare of common people. But his very goodness becomes twisted by obsession. He convinces himself that dragons are essential to his reforms, and this conviction leads him to take increasingly desperate measures. The road to Summerhall is paved with good intentions, and it ends in fire and death. This pattern repeats throughout Targaryen history. Baelor the Blessed starves himself to death out of religious devotion. Aerion drinks wildfire believing he'll become a dragon. Even Daenerys, in Game of Thrones, believes she's liberating cities and breaking the wheel of oppression, right up until she decides to burn King's Landing to the ground. The tragedy isn't that Targaryens are inherently evil, it's that their particular combination of power, pride, and genetic instability transforms noble goals into nightmarish realities. So what have we learned from comparing Targaryen madness across these eras? First, that dragons are both stabilizer and amplifier. They might provide psychological benefits to their riders, but they also enable the worst expressions of madness to reach catastrophic scale. Second, that genetics matter. The periods when Targaryens married outside the family produced more stable rulers, while returns to incestuous marriage amplified the madness. And third, that context is everything. The same family, the same bloodline, produces wildly different outcomes depending on whether they have dragons, whether they're genetically diverse or inbred, and whether the political situation allows for their madness to be contained or enables it to spread. The Dunk and Egg era shows us what Targaryens look like when they're stripped of dragons but not yet fallen from power. It's a bittersweet period where we see the family's potential for both greatness and madness, but on a more human scale. House of the Dragon shows us the opposite, Targaryens at the peak of their power, where their madness can literally reshape the world through fire and blood. And Game of Thrones shows us the end result. A dynasty that's lost everything except its madness, clinging to prophecies and birthrights while the realm they once ruled has moved on without them. George R.R. Martin's genius is in showing us that madness isn't simple. It's not just about bad genetics or evil people, it's about power without check, ambition without wisdom, and the tragic gap between what we intend and what we actually accomplish. The Targaryens wanted to be heroes, to fulfill prophecies, to rule justly, to bring back dragons. And in pursuing these goals with Targaryen intensity, they burned themselves and much of Westeros in the process. The gods didn't just flip a coin when each Targaryen was born. They flipped it every time a Targaryen made a choice. And far too often, it landed on madness. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into Targaryen madness across the ages. The contrast between these eras reveals so much about how power, genetics, and circumstances shape the same family in radically different ways. If you enjoyed this analysis, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which era of Targaryen history you find most fascinating. Should I cover the Blackfire rebellions next, or dive deeper into the specific madness of characters like Aerys 2? Your feedback shapes what content comes next. Until then, remember, when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die, but if you're a Targaryen, you might just burn everything down trying. I'll see you in the next one.